This point in time, when the country's trust in its leaders, institutions, and in some circles, government itself, is at historic lows, there is one person in the political landscape that stands alone. He is the paragon of restraint and focus. He is not Morgan Freeman, nor is he Alex Trebek. He is, of course, General David Petraeus. If you don't believe me, just look at what happened when President Obama nominated Petraeus to his current post as top U.S. and NATO commander in Afghanistan. You'll recall Obama had to call on Petraeus' services after General McChrystal talked smack about his civilian superiors and got himself canned. But when Obama tapped Petraeus to step in for the dismissed McChrystal, it took the U.S. Senate all of 7 days to confirm Petraeus' nomination by a vote of 99-0. Here's what they had to say about him.
You're not allowed to assume confirmation, by the way, but I am allowed to assume confirmation.
I'm not sure Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley, or Hammerin' Hank Aaron would get those kinds of accolades or that kind of vote margin, particularly if nominated by a Democratic president. Now, just as he did under President Bush with Iraq, General Petraeus is using that reputational capital to convince the American public of the idea that the war we are fighting is winnable and worth the cost. Just in the last few days, General Petraeus has given interviews to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and NBC's David Gregory. He pushed back against the one assurance President Obama has given the American people about the war in Afghanistan, that by next summer, we will start to withdraw our troops. The conditions on the ground, Petraeus says, will determine the withdrawal date. The conditions on the ground meaning his assessment of the conditions on the ground.
What the president very much wants from me and what we talked about in the Oval Office is a responsibility of a military commander on the ground to provide his best professional military advice. Leave the politics to him. Certainly, I'm aware of the context within which I offer that advice, but that just informs the advice. It doesn't drive it. We have recommended the strategy and the resources that are required for that strategy, and as there are changes in any of that, obviously I would communicate that to him.
July 2011, when forces are supposed to begin to come out. Is your job here now as commander to try to slow down that Washington clock?
Well, I think our job is, again, to show those in Washington that there is progress being made.
Our job is, again, to show those in Washington that there is progress being made. Really? That's the job of the top commander in Afghanistan? It sounds like he's saying it's to make the case for war. That is true. If the commander's job is to make the case for the war, then General Petraeus can never, ever say, hey, guys, this isn't working. Because he is both personally, by the very nature of who he is, and institutionally duty-bound to see the war as a project that is redeemable, worth pursuing, and ultimately can be won. So to the extent to which General Petraeus is the salesperson for the White House, or the person we all hitch our wagon to, is the extent to which we make it impossible to actually end the war. Joining us now is Rajiv Chandrasekaran, associate editor for the Washington Post. He interviewed General Petraeus this week. Rajiv, thanks so much for joining us.
Good to be on with you this evening.
Okay, I have to ask this as a first question. I have never interviewed the general myself. Is he this towering, colossally awesome dude that everybody pictures him as? I mean, I wonder the degree to which his public image is a product of his actual competence and how much it's a product of very shrewd management of said image.
Well, I mean, he's undeniably a very smart, driven individual. You know, when you sit down with him, it actually isn't like sitting down with a number of other generals where you're just sort of either pummeled with facts or meant to sort of just kind of cower in the presence of him. He actually has a little bit more of an academic side. And he, of course, is a PowerPoint geek, so he will sort of display lots of slides in trying to make his points. But it is a good back and forth conversation. I mean, I found it to be a pretty enlightening discussion that I spent with him last week for over an hour in Kabul.
So there seem to be two theories about what exactly the kind of thrust of what he's saying about the 2011 drawdown, either that he's undermining that deadline or he supports it with certain preconditions. I wonder what's your interpretation of this? It seems to me like he's kind of laying the groundwork for us not beginning the drawdown when we said we would.
You know, I think he's playing a sort of a shrewder, longer game than either of those, and that is he's not trying to litigate the issue of July 2011 right now. He recognizes that that is an issue that will be dealt with after the December White House review of Afghan strategy. It'll probably be, you know, hashed out sometime next spring. Right now, I think Petraeus' focus is the flagging American public support for the war, in large part because obviously the conflict has gotten more violent. There are real significant questions about whether President Hamid Karzai and his government are true partners of the Americans, and a whole host of other questions about the effort over there. And so I think what Petraeus is trying to do is address some of those issues right now, as opposed to trying to deal directly with the July 2011 drawdown as he's starting to take command.
What is your sense from the reporting you've done? I mean, there's been cases in which it has appeared, particularly with Stanley McChrystal in the past, in the policy review of Afghanistan leading up to the Afghanistan surge, that essentially McChrystal and others within the military were attempting to use leaks to the press, public statements, as a means of boxing the White House into something policy-wise. Is your sense that these interviews being given by Petraeus are him freelancing and he's taking this on, or is this being done at the behest of the White House?
I think this is a coordinated campaign that is obviously being done with coordination with senior levels of the Pentagon and obviously at the White House. Petraeus went into a period of media silence as soon as he took over for about 5 weeks, and there is now going to be a sort of a calculated rollout that will involve a number of television news programs, other print interviews, and the like. He's very comfortable with the media. He, of course, used his ability to engage with the press to great effect in Iraq, and I think the White House, as well as senior officials at the Pentagon, are hoping that he can do some of the same things in Kabul, trying to help effectively sell the war, sell the president's own strategy. So I don't see him at this point freelancing. I see him actually getting out there and conveying what has been approved by the president and by his national security team. Interestingly, the president doesn't give a whole lot of speeches about Afghanistan, not like his predecessor did about Iraq.
Right.
And so it may well fall to General Petraeus to be a little bit more of the front man for the strategy in the coming months.
I wonder what you think about where he stands in this kind of nexus of politics and sort of professional military duty. I mean, what makes him a useful spokesperson is a sense that he's kind of above politics, and yet he seems to me inextricably bound up in politics insofar as he cannot be a neutral adjudicator or observer or sort of advocate about whether the war should continue or not, right? I mean, he seems boxed in, and to the extent that we're listening to him, seems like we're never going to get General Petraeus saying, you know what, guys, this is not working.
Well, he wasn't sent out there to be a neutral observer of the strategy and to sort of report back as a completely disinterested party. I mean, he was sent out there because he was an architect of the strategy that General McChrystal was pursuing, and so he's come and picked up the reins and has carried it forward. So he's a true believer in the counterinsurgency strategy, and it was a strategy and is a strategy that has been approved by President Obama. So he is doing what his commander-in-chief wants him to do. Now, all that said, I don't think Petraeus is a guy who is going to sort of blindly rush off and continue on with a counterinsurgency strategy if he believes after a period of some months that there are real significant problems with it. He's a guy who comes into Afghanistan with this great 1-0 record after being seen as the victor in Iraq. And so if he thinks that things aren't working, I think we could expect to see him essentially try to define downward what it means to sort of prevail there. I just don't see him as a guy who will say, look, even though everything is broken here, I'm going to rush off in the direction of continuing to do this.
I will note that the definition of prevailing has already been defined pretty far down at this point. I'm not sure how much room there is left. Rajiv Chandrasekaran, associate editor for the Washington Post, author of The Masterful Imperial Life in the Emerald City, which I couldn't recommend more highly. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It was really great to talk to you.
Good to talk to you, too.